You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. What's the difference between a famous person and a guru? I'm Mia Freedman. I'm neither. And this is No Filter. When Gwyneth Paltrow recently told the world about her diet and health practices, which involved eating a mix of soup, lemon water and nothing, and doing something called rectal ozone therapy, she accidentally went viral and was widely condemned by health experts and eating disorder specialists.
What's the weirdest wellness thing that you've done?
I have used ozone therapy rectally.
I did know this about you.
It's pretty weird.
It's pretty weird.
But this wasn't just another actress accidentally revealing how little she needs to eat to stay thin. This interview wasn't actually about Gwyneth the actress. It was about the other Gwyneth. Gwyneth, the wellness guru. In the past few years, one of the most famous women in the world has made a really big career transition. She's gone from actress to guru. She's built her Goop brand into a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars by selling essentially her lifestyle to her fans and followers. You can buy the clothes she wears, the beauty products she uses, the candle that smells like her vagina, the incessant cleansers that she does, and the supplements she takes. Oh, there are so many supplements.
I cannot live without my lipospherics. This is a new brand I just discovered, this Cure Hydration. I'm totally obsessed with it. I put it in my water every day and I feel so much better.
But you don't have to have an Oscar or even be a celebrity to become a guru in 2023. All you need is an internet connection and something to say. As organised religion declines in popularity across the Western world, as it has pretty dramatically over the last few decades, people are instead turning to internet gurus. Individuals who use podcasts, YouTube, and social media to spread their ideas to highly engaged fans and followers. These new gurus are harnessing the attention economy and the algorithm really well to build up cult-like followings of people who want to follow their teachings about everything from wellness or fitness, beauty or cryptocurrency, parenting or dating. And it's not all bad. Some of these new gurus are pretty harmless, like productivity gurus, or say Marie Kondo, who helps you declutter your home. But some are more extreme. These gurus peddle extremist conspiracy theories about COVID or cancer treatments. There's one guru who advocates what they call a lion diet as a cure for immune conditions. Another guy who preaches the health benefits of drinking your own urine. And then there are gurus like Andrew Tate, who preaches misogyny to millions of young men and boys dressed up as a way to succeed in business and life.
It's not about being property. It's about the fact that she belongs to him and the intimate parts of her body belong to him because they're in a relationship. And if she wants to sell those, he has a stake in those intimate parts of her body.
So how does an average person become a guru? Well, Helen Lewis is a journalist for The Atlantic and the BBC who's recently done a very deep dive into this world. It's fascinating and at times deeply disturbing. She's got a new podcast called The New Gurus, and she says we are currently in a golden age of gurus, but not necessarily in a good way. This is Helen Lewis on The New Gurus. Helen, what's the difference between a famous person and a guru?
It's a very good question. I think in the traditional conception of celebrity was somebody who was famous for doing a particular job, having a particular skill, whether that was an athlete or an actor or whatever it was, and the fame was a kind of byproduct of that. And then the evolution of that post-reality TV was somebody who was famous for being famous, you know, the sort of Paris Hilton kind of willing yourself into being. And influence is extended away from that in that they were often quite good at something, but that something was often being very attractive or wearing lots of lovely outfits or whatever it might be. And then I think the guru takes that on a level in that they do have the characteristics of both a classic celebrity, and you need charisma, an influencer in that you need a fandom, but actually there's an additional thing which is kind of offering people a way to live. You know, it's an idea of being a spiritual teacher, which is where the word comes from in the Sanskrit. And so when I think people are offering kind of life advice, you know, and something maybe beyond being kind of just a life coach, which I think can be a very positive thing into something where they're trying to communicate to lots of people at one time, to be a kind of prophet or a teacher.
Gwyneth, it's a big couple of weeks for Gwyneth. We're recording this in the week that she's on trial for skiing, but the week before she sort of accidentally went viral by giving an interview where she talked about
her bone broth, right? Yeah.
Her diet and wellness routine.
I eat dinner early in the evening. I do a nice intermittent fast. And in the morning, I'll have some things that won't spike my blood sugar, right? So I have coffee. I have bone broth for lunch a lot of the days. Try to do 1 hour of movement. So I'll either take a walk or I'll do Pilates or I'll do my Tracy Anderson. And then I get in the sauna. I dry brush and I get in the sauna. So I do my infrared sauna for 30 minutes. And then for dinner, I try to eat lots of vegetables. It's really important for me to support my detox.
I want to ask you about wellness gurus, and I'll get to Gwyneth more specifically in a minute. They've become particularly popular over the last few years. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think lots of us feel that we're living relatively unhealthy lives. If you work in a white-collar job, particularly during the pandemic, you've often been stuck, not just in an office, but stuck in your living room for a long time, sitting down. I know, my hamstrings are not what they were from having to sit down all this time. And, spend too much time looking at screens. If you're busy, you've got kids, you've got a job, all that stuff, you're maybe eating takeaways, fast food, highly processed food, all of these things that contribute to people's feelings that there's some kind of natural state of being that perhaps our ancestors used to live in that was healthier in some way. Like, I know that's a naturalistic fallacy because lots of those people died of preventable diseases and cholera and things like that. But there is a feeling that somehow our lifestyles are kind of making us sick. And that is a very powerful feeling that's shared by lots of people, not just people who are into other kind of exotic things like crystal healing and tarot, but by very mainstream scientific rationalist people also feel like they should eat a lot better, they should exercise more. So they're tapping into a really huge market, to the extent that doctors have this acronym TATT that they write on notes to patients, which stands for tired all the time. Because people turn up and their main symptom is they just feel tired all the time. And that could be anything from like thyroid deficiency to vitamin D deficiency to something very serious. But it could also just be that you work really hard, you commute a lot, and your kids, are knackering. And that's what modern life has kind of done.
It's funny that you say tired all the time because Gwyneth sells a vitamin that's called, I think, Tired All the Time. So Goop is a business worth like hundreds of millions of dollars now. When you saw that video, what did you think through the lens of, everything you know now about new gurus?
My first thought was that she looked incredibly tired. She looked more tired than me, which I don't know if that was supposed to cheer me up or not. But I think, when you're her age and you're very thin as she is, it's not the same as being young and very thin. And they always say that Hollywood actresses feel this. They have to choose between their face and their body. So I felt that this is somebody who looks drawn, she looks like she's living an ascetic lifestyle. And then when you hear her talk about it and you have to say, I have bone broth for lunch, which as I understand it is essentially consomme, like it's very thin soup, right? And then vegetables for dinner. I mean, that made me want to just go away and eat a cream egg. But the thing that's interesting is because she's a woman, people were very quickly ready to say, that looks like orthorexia, that looks like disordered eating, that looks like an eating disorder by any other name. But when men do it, we don't necessarily jump to those labels. So there's a big vogue in Silicon Valley about 10 years ago for something called Soylent, which is essentially like powdered food. And there were lots of tech guys who were like, I'm too busy to eat, so I just have Soylent in meal replacement shakes, essentially. And that was presented in a very different way. When it's presented to women, it's kind of like about, purifying yourself and being thinner. And when it's sold to men, it's presented as, here's how you can work smarter and harder. And like, here, all the supplements that are sold to men are kind of, like Alex Jones's Instahard, are kind of sold in this very macho way. So I find the wellness sphere fascinating because it is so highly gendered. And, Gwyneth Paltrow is a kind of ultra feminine women's guru. And I think the thing that was interesting about that is that she is the brand. She is Goop, long overdue recognition that it's her initials in the name of it. But she's also the signifier, right? It's don't you want to live like her? And then you see the filming in her house and it's all delicious, beige and like lovely scented candles and throw pillows. That's the thing that the guru offers, is a personification of something. The modern world often feels very large and confusing. And I think people are on the search for kind of human-sized things that they can grab onto, which is why, someone becomes a metaphor or a synecdoche for a particular cause. In politics, that happens too. You have sort of referendums on individual people as a way of having referendums on a whole suite of ideas that are quite big. And she has become an avatar for that particular type of wellness. So it's like, do you like Gwyneth? Do you buy this whole lifestyle?
How much of wellness gurus is just a euphemism for being thin and for weight loss?
Well, I think a reasonable amount of it, because obesity and overweight is such a huge problem, particularly in America, to some extent in other Western developed countries. The majority of the population is overweight. And so lots of people feel that they would like to be thinner. It's just a pretty universal construct. At the same time that despite the body positivity movement of the last couple of years, you switch on your TV, you look at a film, and it is full of people who fundamentally don't look like you. The representation is now occasionally there. I get a lot of underwear adverts on Instagram featuring people who are my size. And being a child of the 90s, I'm kind of faintly horrified by this. I'm like, why are my thin women selling me underwear? Where are people with tiny breasts that don't even need a bra selling me a bra? That's what I'm used to. So some things have got better, but nonetheless, we're still living in this divided culture where thinness is the ideal. And not only that, it's seen as sort of spiritually better. And I think those are the ideals that I grew up with. I don't know about you, but the idea that being thin was about self-control and self-restraint. In fact, people had to let themselves go. They were sort of disgusting in some way. There was too much of them. Why couldn't they control themselves? Those are all the toxic messages that I think I grew up with. And that's why I think there is a kind of quasi-spiritual idea about it, right? Not just the fact that fasting to some extent gives you a high. It's used in lots and lots of religious traditions for that reason. You kind of go through the barrier of hunger and into this kind of euphoric state, but also because it is seen as being detaching yourself from your dirty, disgusting, corporeal, earthly body and being in a sort of spiritual realm.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and about the gendered aspect of wellness, because Tim Ferriss, who is, I guess you would say he's a productivity guru, the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, who then wrote a book called The 4-Hour Body, and he has a podcast. And for The 4-Hour Body, it was all about hacking, all the Soylent stuff that you said. And he was trying to work out what the absolute optimum amount to eat is so that there's no wastage. So he would weigh everything before he ate it, and then he would weigh his poo.
The weirdest thing I tracked to try to identify calories in versus calories out, I had to look at excretion. So I actually measured my poo for a while in grams.
And he would try and work out what to put in so that there was as little as possible coming out. I mean, just crazy stuff. But he has, again, a following of millions of people. And when a man does it, it's seen as kind of sensible.
Seen as kind of like biohacking, isn't it? It's seen as quantified self.
Yeah. And when I heard Gwyneth, what struck me was that she was talking to her, in quote marks, doctor, a guy called Will Cole, who it was his podcast, and he isn't a doctor. She said he's her doctor, but he's not a doctor of medicine. He's a doctor of like being a chiropractor and stuff. It struck me that she spoke so honestly about what she ate with no sense that that would not be received well, because she thought she was speaking within her guru world to like-minded people. And I wanted to ask you if that is a kind of a tenet of being a guru, that things that sound normal to your following only sound radical when they're, taken out of that context.
That's a really interesting point, because one of the things I felt, and when I was covering these gurus, having been a journalist now for, getting on for 20 years, is that they are some of the least self-conscious people, or maybe the last unself-conscious people left on the internet. The internet style and newspaper and journalism for the last decade has been characterized by being kind of soaked in irony and self-awareness, that you're sort of posing, you're living your life in this very self-conscious way, you're doing it for the gram. And what you get when you listen to lots of these guru types are people who are just completely themselves in a very weird way. And I think that means that there is a tendency for the mainstream to sneer at them. But actually, people really like the earnestness. People find the irony-soaked culture sometimes, and the idea that you're supposed to know all these like precepts and what to say and what phrases aren't, say, kind of exhausting. And so I think there is a kind of relief at coming to somebody who's just going, I'm not judging you, we're all weird, And I think that's the same with someone like Gwyneth Paltrow as it is of someone like perhaps Jordan Peterson, who is a very different type of guru. Also somebody with his own, let's be honest, crazy eating habits, right? He only eats beef. His wife only eats lamb. They have a whole suite of dietary kind of stuff going on.
You have done this for how long now?
I've been on a pure carnivore diet for about 2 months, and a very, very low carb, greens only, modified carnivore diet for about a year.
But To outsiders, he's often treated as kind of a joke, this sort of boomer saying strange things on the internet or mashed up Freudianism. There's a feeling that, he's a bit weird, but like he's himself, right? At least he's not self-conscious. And the sheer lack of self-consciousness, I think, is what's attractive sometimes.
You talk about it being a golden age of gurus. What do you think has led to the explosion in people telling us how to live better lives?
There's a political dimension to it. As I say, I think there is a feeling of overwhelm sometimes politically, that things are changing incredibly fast. The world is very scary. And then I think there is an economic factor, which is that, Gwyneth being a case in point, lots of the internet subsist on supplements, which are essentially unregulated medicine. If you want to sell a medicine, you have to go through all kinds of hoops. But if you want to sell a supplement, as long as it's not actively poisoning people, and you're pretty vague about its claims, you can have very wide latitudes. So it's notable that both Gwyneth Paltrow and Alex Jones, from very different political places, both have a big part of their business that's built on supplements.
Yeah, Alex Jones being what would you say? He's
the conspiracy theorist host of InfoWars, who's banned from lots of social.
Who talks about Sandy Hook being made up.
They've got, in one shot, leaves blowing and flowers that are out, and you see the leaves blowing, and they glitch. They're recycling a green screen behind them.
And Joe Rogan also sells vitamins.
Yeah, and the Liver King sells raw liver meat pills, and then had to release an apology video saying that actually his enormously jacked physique was not down to his supplements, but in fact due to the fact that he'd been taking steroids.
Primals, I'm making this video to apologize. Because I fucked up. Because I'm embarrassed and ashamed. Because I lied. And I misled a lot of people.
And to outsiders, I come from a kind of skeptical tradition where I'm very much saying that, if this stuff worked, it would be medicine and they would have to regulate it. By definition, the only way that they can sell it like this is because it doesn't work. But that sounds to people who are desperate or invested like you're just being a kind of naysayer. You don't want the best for them, whereas the gurus want the best for them. So I think all of that catalyzes it. And also the thing I felt quite strongly is that moments of change is when people want gurus. And that can be change politically in the sense of new movements arise, or it can be personal change. So when you first have a baby, you definitely want somebody to tell you it's going to be okay. You're probably not going to drop the baby on the head. Lots of people have done this before. It's probably going to be fine. And, if you're not getting that from your National Childbirth Trust classes or from your mum or from your friends who've already been through it, then where do we look now? We obviously look on the internet. So part of this story is also a thesis that's been around in political psychology for a long time, which is the kind of bowling alone idea, the idea of the breakdown of in-person communities. And I think the pandemic was a huge accelerant for the worst bits of the guru sphere, the kind of conspiracy-minded bits of the guru sphere, because people were stuck at home, they were scared, and they were looking online to people who said that they had the answers. They knew that Bill Gates was microchipping people, or this was all part of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. And that was a moment of profound change in their lives. Their lives have been disrupted utterly. And here were people who were promising them all the answers.
Is certainty a big part of what makes a guru?
Partially. And I think it's one of the big appeals of conspiracy theories is that in some ways they replace God in the sense that they make everything make sense. There is an agent, there is somebody who is in charge of the world. In the same way that for a medieval peasant, God was in charge of the world, and maybe your crops died, but that was God's will, and maybe your child got sick, but that was God's will. Someone was doing all this to you, and you could therefore pray to God and hope to have an effect on it. And I think when you get the increase of secularization, it becomes a very horrifying realization that the world is a kind of chaotic, dangerous thing where bad things happen to good people and everyone you loved is going to die. And so conspiracy theorists, help reassert some of that control. It's the bankers who are running the world. It's the World Economic Forum who are running the world. There are people now. You'll be able to put a label onto the things that you fear happening to you. So I think that level of certainty is interesting. But it's not always the case that gurus promise to have all the answers exactly. I'm fascinated by the fact that, you have these dating gurus who are single, for example, or crypto gurus who've lost previously billions of pounds of money. And so their appeal, I think, is more of like you're on the journey with them. Which is a kind of relief too, which is we're all flawed, we all make mistakes, but we're all striving, we're all getting there. I'm not saying this from, my Mount Olympus. I'm saying I'm going through it with you. And that's a very appealing rhetorical style as well.
I was going to ask also if conspiracy theories, are they just also kind of fun? Like this idea, I notice whenever I speak to or read about conspiracy theorists, there's always a sense of they know something that everyone else doesn't know. Like they've got this access to the truth and there's a real superiority about it.
The one psychological trait recent research has shown that is most correlated with believing in conspiracy theories is narcissism. And it makes sense because also, in the same way that the social media age is so good for conspiracy theories, because what is social media really brilliant at? How are you doing? What's happening in your life? Like, tell me about you. All of the things I find that I see on Twitter are kind of like, name a song from the year you were born. It's a way of inserting yourself into the narrative, right? That you are the protagonist of reality. And that's the same thing that a conspiracy theory like QAnon, which is a kind of crowdsourced conspiracy theory, the idea being that there's this vast plot and there were all these drops of information from someone called Q that were kind of cryptic. But what did they do? They put ordinary people into the role of being the seekers for truth. You and your compadres on the forums were working out what these things meant. You were driving the narrative forward. You're not somebody that just history was happening to. You were the one who was going to kind of crack this code. And I think you see that in lots of conspiracy theories, the idea, as you say, that other people are, a sheeple. Their eyes haven't been opened and you are in some ways kind of enlightened because you've seen the truth. And again, that's not a million miles away from the religious idea that you've been saved, right? And that you might have to proselytize and tell other people. And some of those religious traditions have very similar rhetoric about, accepting the faith into themselves, that you become a better person through accepting that.
Someone who is really in this territory is Russell Brand. And as you say in your podcast, if you haven't checked in with Russell Brand for a little while, you might be surprised. I just want to play a little bit of his most recent video.
Tucker Carlson, who some people hate because they're so perfect, has apologised for promoting the Iraq war. Why don't more mainstream figures apologise for promoting wars and lying to us just a couple of years ago? Is it because there's so many lies the whole system would fall apart? Hello there, you 6.3 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom. Together we can cultivate the light within ourselves and eradicate the darkness that they would have us die within. If you haven't turned on the notification bell yet, turn on the notification bell right now and subscribe to this channel. We make content every single day and we want you to see...
And it goes on.
Oh, it goes on.
Now, listening to that sounds like someone who's quite unhinged, but he's clearly not, because when I looked at his YouTube channel, it's all very much optimized with the titles of the videos, the thumbnails. It's all very much optimized for the algorithm, which is extremism, outrage, all of these things. He's kind of shouting like a crazy person. What's his shtick? What is this about?
I mean, I think it's his greatest acting performance yet. I think if you look at that, doesn't it make you think of sort of 19th century, revivalist preachers? If he fell to the floor and started speaking in tongues, it wouldn't be that out of character with what's going on there. And it's entertaining. And, I find it kind of deeply horrifying because it's not my bag at all. But like it's moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The narratives are very easy. And he is occupying an unusual space, which is actually kind of left wing. Like I think these labels become difficult in some of these spheres.
It's almost when left meets right. They're both so extreme that they meet.
Yeah, that there is a kind of anti-establishmentness to it. And the person that he's defending there, Tucker Carlson, is a host on America's Fox News who has traveled to Hungary to praise Viktor Orban, who is a very illiberal right-wing leader there, anti-immigration, anti-LGBT, anti-abortion rights, all that kind of stuff. So Russell Brand is coming from this kind of left-wing tradition, but in his case against the Iraq war is a kind of the traditional left-wing one, right, which is where I came from. So he's sort of in this odd political space. But primarily the thing that links all of it is anti-elites. And he does this while, making millions from this, right? As you say, He's got a big staff earning from it. But you put him in a continuum with kind of populist leaders, where being against a sort of a shadowy global elite is kind of part of the shtick. But the thing that's interesting that he does, I think, is very clever, is in that clip, for example, he's saying, Tucker Carlson apologized for supporting the right. Well, why can't everyone else? They're all liars. And like, who is they? If I ever write a kind of PhD thesis, I want to be like the use of they in Russell Brand's videos, because there were loads of people in British public life who were very opposed. I mean, they were some of the biggest marches in British political history were opposed. 1 million people marched against the Iraq war. This was not the government's view.
And in Australia as well, yeah.
Right. It's not a kind of an opinion that was completely fringe at the time. And, I was opposed to the Iraq war, and I'm not going to sort of 20 years later go around trading on it. But it is very helpful for Russell Brand to embroider his narrative of kind of corrupt elites. And it's interesting that he there is so generous to Tucker Carlson, because Tucker Carlson has peddled a lot of enormously damaging misinformation through that show that he has, including stuff about January 6th, the storming of the Capitol in America and the idea that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. And it's like, well, is he going to apologize for that? But it's very strategic in the sense of you will just conscript in people to your narrative whenever you want, because you're always constantly trying to just tell this one story, and it's the story of us against them. And there is no world in which Tucker Carlson, who has an incredibly highly rated show on American television, is a multi-millionaire, texts the president or the president's chief of staff all the way through the Trump administration, is some lone voice in the wilderness. And yet the kind of constant use of the kind of elite narrative is just very, very useful.
He talked also about lightness and dark. We are the light, they are the darkness. This idea of, it's like Star Wars. Is that part of the shtick? We are the enlightened ones, whether it's Gwyneth talking about her bone broth and her rectal ozone therapy, or him talking about his beliefs?
Yeah, he does a couple of things that are really interesting with that. And one of them is, as you say, light, dark, which is where guru comes from. In the Sanskrit, it means bringer of light, dispeller of darkness. It's something that's embroidered into the idea from the start. But the thing that amuses me is this kind of very charismatic evangelist religious language married with ultimate 2020s techno content creator demands, right? So it's like the 6.3 million Awakening Wonders goes up every time he's got more followers, just to really emphasize lots of people like him. And then he's kind of switches absolutely seamlessly from the light within us is nurtured to click the like button.
Yes!
Which every time I just find this as much as Jesus would have done. And if you love the feeding of the 5,000, why not subscribe to my YouTube channel?
And Gwyneth, in that interview about her wellness where she's very earnest, it's also spruiking all the vitamins that she sells and all the other products that she sells on Goop, as does the so-called doctor that she talks to, who has ads littered throughout the interview for his products. I guess I wanted to ask you, do you think Russell Brand believes that shit?
I think people are very good, and I want to exempt myself from this, at convincing themselves of things that are useful for them. If you take a decision and then you find some post hoc rationalization for it, I think that is a fairly common trait in human psychology. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if he does to some extent. I think he'll probably actually, where he sees himself is as a seeker. He thinks he's asking questions that other people aren't. And he sees that as journalism. This is what's really hard to kind of fight against some of this stuff, because fundamentally you should be asking questions about the World Economic Forum. It's a big multinational body that does have a summit to which, very high power people are invited. That's a legitimate thing to do. It's that you should ask, specific questions rather than just going, something going on there, I think. And the perversion of journalism is what kind of annoys me. Some of these people would say that I'm the enemy, and that they would get their fans to agree with this. All I'm trying to tell you is a subscription to The Atlantic, and you can take it or leave it, really. I'm not trying to flog you vitamin pills that have no clinical evidence behind them. So who is the most honest broker here? But that's the thing that I find very difficult to contest about some of these guys. They're salespeople for themselves and for a particular way of life and for literal merchandise. And that is somehow yet seen as more honest than being a mainstream journalist or academic. And I don't know quite how you deal with that or counter that.
Because every single one of them is selling something, right? So Gwyneth is selling her Smell Like My Vagina candles and her vitamins, and Russell Brand what's Russell Brand selling?
Subscriptions to his Rumble network. So because he got a COVID strike for misinformation on YouTube, he moved over to an unmoderated platform called Rumble, which is now based in Florida. And he sells memberships. And he also has a festival in the summer as well. It sort of sounds amazing. It's kind of vegan and drug-free. It's like sort of everything that Russell Brand from about 20 years ago would have found incredibly boring. When I interview people for the series, I like productivity gurus, genuinely a lovely bunch of people by and large. And I have a huge amount of time for them because I'm always stressed and busy and behind on deadlines. But the way that they talked about what their job involves, they have to sell themselves and their ideas constantly. And fundamentally, no one has got that many ideas. But the YouTube algorithm penalizes if you're not posting all the time, not posting regularly. Yeah. So you have to be on this content treadmill, and everything has to be optimized. As you say, you will notice if you go around YouTube now that all the thumbnails have a particular idea, which is usually a sort of screenshot of someone going, gasp, and then a big headline next to it. they're very clear about what the bits are that run in the preview. You know, you have to obey very specific controls on what's in the first kind of minute of the video and stuff like that. So it's all highly optimized, quite technical work to make this stuff. And you're expected to pump it out, pump, create this content river.
And to be clear, Russell Brand doesn't even need to sell a product. I was looking at the view numbers on his videos. That last video that I just showed you, it's been up for 13 hours and it's got something like 800,000 views. That in itself is monetized.
If he's got adverts on it, he might not have adverts on it, though. This is the interesting thing, is that because YouTube has tried to kind of crack down on misinformation, some of the biggest creators on there use YouTube essentially as a shop window because they can't monetize their videos there, but they can drive a huge amount of traffic to the place where they do actually make their money. And that's why you will see lots of COVID conspiracies on YouTube, even though you think, well, why? Because this is demonetized at minimum, if not getting you strikes. And it's because it does incredibly well there. And what you do is you send people to wherever it is, you know, your affiliate link shop or your whatever it might be.
The algorithm certainly on YouTube is very much optimized to extremism and radicalism. And, you know, you see people like, if they can stay within the bounds of it, Russell Brand succeeding hugely and really gaming that algorithm to drive an enormous following. I don't know if you're familiar with Pete Evans, but speaking of COVID, Pete Evans is an Australian reality TV chef. He used to work in a restaurant. He then went on a show called My Kitchen Rules where he was one of the chef judges, you know, similar to Nigella really. But then he started with diet, became, I think, vegan, became quite extreme in his eating habits. And then around the time of COVID, he became, the only way I can describe it is radicalized, and then started talking about all these COVID conspiracies and went further and further until he started talking about Nazis and got kicked off all the platforms, lost all his endorsements, and now is on one of those fringe Parler or whatever it's called, Rumble probably, where he, I think, just screams into the void.
Well, just when you thought 2020 couldn't get any more bizarre, the mainstream media have come out and labelled me a racist and a neo-Nazi. The fact that I had to actually Google what neo-Nazi meant is pretty telling.
But he also did this exact same thing as Russell Brand, which is COVID seemed to really, for all the reasons you say, superpower a lot of these conspiracy theorists into gurus. And it was around this idea of asking questions. Why is that so insidious? Because it feels so rageful. And Gwyneth says that as well. Whenever they're criticised, they're like, I'm just asking questions. I'm just asking questions. What's wrong with asking questions? Gwyneth said that this week. What is so insidious about it?
I think you have to regard it in the sense of almost a religious belief, in the sense that it is immune to evidence, right? It is never the case when Russell Brand does one of his videos saying, what's the truth about the war in Ukraine? That the truth about the war in Ukraine is, it turns out, the one that is pretty well accepted as the mainstream narrative, which is that Russia wants to expand its territories and launched an unprovoked war of aggression on a sovereign nation, right? The answer can never be the mainstream one, because why would you watch Russell Brand rather than read The Guardian or the New York Times or listen to ABC or whatever it might be? So there's that style. Like Christopher Hitchens once said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I think there's a version of that, which is, when you're watching someone, have they ever come to the conclusion that wasn't the one that you would expect? Like when they've just asked the question, has the question ever taken them somewhere that you wouldn't expect? And I think it's something that, you know, is a criticism you can make of mainstream journalism too, that narratives are very strong and political partisanship is very strong. And the best journalists are ones who are willing to make a good, strong, evidence-based case against the thing that everybody thinks. And it makes them unpopular, but they marshal all the evidence and they put it out there. But this is the bit about the evidence. That's the hard bit of journalism, right? Going and finding the evidence. Anybody can ask the question. Answering the question, like, that's the really hard bit. And that's the bit that I think is a real shame, because it's, you know, we've lost a huge amount of local journalism in the last 10, 20 years. The internet's really hollowed it out. So the people who are going to your local council meeting, you know, local district court, whatever it might be, those people have been hollowed out. There is a lot less good information about your community out there than there once was. That journalism was not very well paid, but it was vital and essential to democracy. And what you've got instead are people who are, you know, making a living, grinding out views by just launching speculative theories into the void, but never doing the hard bit of actually going and, okay, fine. So you think that Bill Gates is putting microchips and stuff. Go find the evidence. Go track down the plant where you think he's doing that. Like, go and put a case together. But they don't want to acquire any of those skills.
And that's what's always so hilarious, that part of it is that the mainstream, including journalists like you and I, are somehow part of this conspiracy to silence it. It's like, have you met a journalist? They would sell their grandmother to get the scoop that somehow Bill Gates is putting microchips in vaccines. Like, everyone would want that story.
I think that the kind of lab leak hypothesis is a really good, interesting example of this. So, it is not completely implausible that the COVID virus could have escaped from a lab. There was a gain-of-function lab in the area of Wuhan. It's not something that should be dismissed, straight off the bat. But what has happened is that scientists, some of whom were quite sympathetic to that theory in the start, have gone away and done the evidence. They've looked for instead zoonotic animal transmission. They've put their cases together. They've published in peer-reviewed journals. And that is now a debate that is much closer to being settled in the favour of an animal outbreak than it once was. That's the process working as it should, where you ask the question and then you try and find out the answer. And the trouble is, it requires a really difficult level of skills, and it relies on a level of elite credentialism that people don't want to acquire, perhaps can't acquire. And so they stand on the outside. And there are these very potent myths of the kind of lone outsider standing against the system. So you will often hear, Galileo referenced. Another one I think about a lot is Semmelweis, poor old Semmelweis, who was a doctor who noticed that midwives were killing a lot fewer of their childbirth patients than doctors who came straight from examining corpses to deliver babies, and sort of was a developer of the antiseptic method. And he went mad. No one listened to him and he went mad. So these people do exist, but quite a lot of the people who have had the crazy one idea that everybody rejected, it was because their idea was crazy. So there's a great saying in social science, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. And that's the great thing that I think a good journalist does and a bad conspiracy theorist doesn't do, is tries to think about, is this a once-in-a-lifetime world-shattering conspiracy? Is it also the fifth such world-shattering conspiracy I've uncovered this week? Because that begins to look implausible.
Who's the most vulnerable to gurus?
I think that's a hard question to answer, because there are kind of gurus, and because they work on the internet and the audience feedback is so direct, are often very optimized for a particular audience. So I don't think you can say it's old people, it's young people, it's men, it's women.
Is it people who are less educated, have poor mental health? Is it people who are at a bad place in their lives? I mean, you mentioned when they're at a point of their lives where there's great change or great uncertainty or great anxiety. Is it less a demographic and more kind of an emotional mental state that makes you vulnerable to a guru?
I think that's true. I imagine because education levels are correlated with trust in the mainstream, that actually I would imagine lower education levels are more correlated with seeking out alternative sources of advice. I know women that I've worked with who are incredibly into tarot, for example, and I'm like, it's just some cards. But the other thing that's interesting about that is the fact that sometimes with some of these internet spaces, there's a level of taking them seriously at the same time as not. So I don't know if sometimes those people genuinely believe that tarot can tell them anything, so much as they like the reassurance, they like the kind of ritual of it. And you see that weirdly. I've been doing some work recently on Andrew Tate, the misogynist influencer, and trying to look into how boys and young men feel about him. And there is a sense that they see the misogyny, but they don't take it seriously to some extent. That they feel that it's a performance, it's joking. And it's hard to get across the idea that even if you joke and make a misogynist joke to your friend, your female friend, she's probably still going to feel diminished by it. Even if you're joking, it can have real world consequences. And that's something that you saw very much in the online kind of alt-right memosphere around the kind of Trump years in America, the sort of sense that we're making Nazi hand signals just to let people know that we're in on the joke, that ho, 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 the normie mainstream would think this is a Nazi hand signal. And that lasted all up until the Christchurch shooter did that okay signal in the dock after having killed several dozen people. And it's like, well, it's not so funny anymore, is it? Because some people just don't get that you're all in this zone of irony. They take it absolutely seriously. And so that's one of the things I think characterizes the internet. The kind of slippage between don't take me seriously, take me very seriously. And which kind of comes back to your just asking questions thing, right? It's like, I'm not saying that, Hillary Clinton's a vampire, or am I? Am I?
But could she be? I don't know. Some people are asking questions.
Toss it in the air, see how that one comes down, yes.
After the break, I asked Helen how someone like Andrew Tate, who is a former reality show contestant, actually becomes the guru? And what does a guy who drinks his own wee have to do with it? You mentioned Andrew Tate, and I'm glad you did, because I would definitely say he is a guru. He is a guru to young men and boys, distressingly, and he sort of uses misogyny as a tool to promote the idea of business success. Now, he was just a reality TV star. How do you become a guru?
I think he's a really interesting case study, because I think even when you saw Russell Brand in his mainstream iteration, I've met a lot of actors and even a lot of stand-ups who, when they're not on stage or not performing, are very normal people. And that wasn't the case when you met Russell Brand in 2013, which I did. You know, he was on. You know, he was just happy inhabiting that persona, you know, clinking in all the silver jewelry. He was very goth at the time, right? So he was wearing sort of drainpipe jeans and silver jewelry, maybe like a trilby and stuff like that. That was how he lived. And I've met some comics like that you almost think you wouldn't know who you were if you were in an empty room. You know, you only exist in relation to an audience. And I think that's something similar about people I know. I've talked to a documentary maker who met Tate and went to the compound in Romania. And he said it was full of sort of women shining the same bit of kitchen counter over and over again. And it had, like, you know, Andrew Tate in neon lights on the wall or something like that. And he said it was like he'd created a reality TV show about Andrew Tate. And so it doesn't seem that bizarre to me that he went from being in someone else's reality TV show to being in his own reality TV show, because the commitment to inhabiting that persona 24/7 was there. And, you know, both of those guys, who are very different in lots of ways, exemplify something that you see in a lot of gurus, which is just incredible eloquence and loquaciousness. I find the Tate performance equally sort of not for me. Obviously, in a lot of ways, not for me. I hate the misogyny, but also just the boastfulness, you know, the very childish, I did 1,000 squats today. You know, what are you doing with your life, loser? Just comes across like extremely cringe to me. But I can see that there's a demographic for whom it really works.
What's the difference between a guru and a cult leader? Because, you know, when you look at that messianic way that Russell Brand presents himself and Andrew Tate and Gwyneth to an extent, when does it cross over into cultishness and sort of David Koresh, Waco style cults?
Well, so the sociology has this idea about weak bonds and strong bonds. And there's a very famous essay by Malcolm Gladwell in the New Yorker about whether or not Twitter and social networks would cause real life revolutions. And he called it something like the revolution will not be tweeted. The idea being that, you know, if you're running a revolution against an oppressive state or whatever it might be, you need to feel really connected to the people next to you. And his example was the civil rights protests in the US. You know, if you're going to go on marches, civil rights marches where you might be beaten up, have dogs set on you, you need to trust the people that you're doing this in, that you're alongside. Whereas what social media gives us is this illusion of these enormous grassroots movements like Me Too, for example, and these huge sense that there's this huge outpouring and uprising, but the weak bonds mean that it struggles to convert into actual political action because you're not forming a pressure group, you know? And that's how I feel a bit about Me Too. It was useful in some ways because it really raised the consciousness of people to say, this happened to me, this happened to me. But in terms of actually achieving the kind of changes you'd want to, you know, police taking offences seriously or companies taking sexual harassment at work seriously, it didn't do everything I think we kind of hoped it would. So I think the thing with the way the internet gurus work is they're very good at generating huge numbers of followers with weak bonds. But if you're a cult leader, you actually need 70 people with very strong bonds, really. Like, that's the thing, isn't it? Is anyone going to drink the special Kool-Aid that Russell Brand has brewed for them? Maybe not. Maybe not. Like, this is what I mean. But
right. So it has to be in person if you're a cult leader.
Every cult that I can think of in its sort of finished form has been not just people, but people living together. You know, it's often on some deserted compound or ranch. Or Jared Leto has something pretty close to a cult, the actor Jared Leto, where he invites people to dress in white and go and visit him on an island. And I think if you're going to do some of the weirder things that cults get up to, then, you know, the group needs to be melded together in a way. Because I find I'm sitting there watching a Russell Brand YouTube video. I have no idea about the other people who are watching. I mean, I know there are other YouTube commenters, but who has ever felt great solidarity with another YouTube commenter? Whereas if you're all sitting in an audience together, watching someone speak, having the same transformative experience, that's a much more powerful bond in between the followers, I would have said.
See, I think by looking and seeing that there were 900,000 views in 24 hours, to me, that makes me feel part of something bigger. You know, if I look and it's got 500 views, then I'm like, this guy might be talking shit. But ironically, it's about the sheeple, because you look at it and you go, well, if 900,000 people have watched it in the last day, he must be onto something.
Oh, yeah. And also the other one that's great is that, it's been banned, so it must be interesting.
Yes. And it must be true.
This must be a truth that people are trying to suppress. And I think, my views on this have kind of evolved, because I think unless you are a totalitarian state like China, which genuinely can control its internet to some extent, then genuinely what no platforming does is just drive people elsewhere where they will have an even more captive audience. It'll be even harder to see what it is that they're saying. I really think there's a huge problem. It's really difficult as a journalist covering this stuff when it happens in audio or video. You can't skim audio in the same way that you can skim text. So people get away with a lot more in podcasts. Believe me, I have used this myself because I like saying spicy things in podcasts and not getting cancelled for them as much as the next person. But you know what I mean? Until Andrew Tate hit the headlines because he was the most Googled man in Earth or whatever it was, actually, unless you were a 13-year-old boy who had access to social media, you might never have heard of him. And that's the thing I think is a really big challenge, is that our kind of ecosystem, I think, much more have a set of shared reference points, that it was assumed even if you hadn't watched, I don't know, whatever it was, like The West Wing, you were at least aware that The West Wing was a TV program that existed
Friends.
that people liked.
Yeah.
Friends being a really classic example. But now there are things that are as popular as Friends that you might never, not just have not watched, but just be completely unaware that they exist.
I wanted to finish by asking you about two gurus that you spoke about in the series. Tom Torero, he was a quiet, nerdy school teacher from Wales. How the hell did he become a guru, and what is he a guru of?
So he became a dating guru in the end, something called day game, which is the practice of going up and talking to women in the street and trying to get them into bed. And what was interesting about him was that his was a kind of explicitly religious journey, in that he'd been very interested in Greek Orthodoxy as a religion. He had taken his wife to a Greek island, and then he sort of said, actually, I really want to be a Greek Orthodox monk. And she left him. She came back to London. And at some point, he went from wanting to be a monk to wanting to be having no sex, presumably, to someone who entirely defined themselves by having sex.
Tom Torero, street hustle from a rainy Wales. And quite appropriately, I'm talking today about indoor day game. That's right, gentlemen, you can talk to girls who are not on the street. You don't have to do that monkey run around, jump in front all the time.
The thing I found, and that's episode 6 of the New Gurus, is that the kind of constant in all of it was a desire to be a source of authority, a source of wisdom, to have people look up to you. And you might get that traditionally. There are lots of traditional forms of authority, and then there are lots of alternative sources of authority as well. And, that's, to me, an interesting dynamic as somebody who works within the mainstream, in that I have a lot of criticisms of, whether it might be the way the Catholic Church, for example, covered up its child abuse scandal for years. I have a friend who was involved in a doctor's malpractice suit from one of those rogue surgeons who just became, had a complete kind of God complex. Any position of authority carries inherent dangers. And so I think he moved from one that we might recognize, a kind of religious authority that could be problematic if left unchecked, to this new form of authority on the internet. And, he was, I think by the end, quite coercive in what he was doing to women. He was recording them without their consent. And unfortunately, he tried to walk away from day game, as far as we know. The recordings came out and he killed himself not long afterwards. And it's an incredibly sad story of somebody who was obviously looking for something and they never found it, or perhaps they found it in the wrong way.
One of the more bizarre gurus that you looked into in the New Gurus was the guy who drinks his own wee.
Will Blunderfield.
Yes. Tell me his story.
Again, another former reality TV contestant. He had wanted to be on Canadian Idol. I wanted to tell Will's story because I liked him a lot. He's as many Canadians are, just a very sweet guy. And he had grown up, eating kind of microwave meals, and was quite a chubby kid, as he described himself. At the time, I think he would have considered himself to be gay. He now says he doesn't really think about labels that way. But he had a boyfriend, and they were out in the street, and someone saw them, didn't like it, and chased them and attacked them. And he went to counselling for it, and they offered him pills. They offered to put a pharmaceutical solution. And he didn't want that. He wanted therapy. He wanted to kind of be at peace with himself in a more kind of spiritual way, I guess. And that took him to alternative wellness practices. And so, that took him to not, kind of giving up processed food, but also Shivambu, which is there are lots of people through history who've drunk their own urine. For something that sounds so revolting to me, it's a surprisingly persistent practice. And, he's absolutely evangelical about it. And the thing about it was I asked a friend to review the medical literature, and he said, well, it's not recommended. That I kind of put it to Will. I was like, but, if you're drinking someone else's, that's, obviously that's a problem. And he went, oh, I won't drink someone else's. I was like, oh, that's very funny. Okay, my own urine. Yeah, it's fine. Someone else's urine. Oh, no, well, come now. That's appalling.
Speaking of come now, and then he was like, it's got some pre-cum in it sometimes. That was a delicious detail that was much appreciated.
Yeah, we had a long discussion about whether or not that was suitable for the BBC audience at lunchtime just before Christmas, as you're getting your, put your roast dinner in the oven. What I liked about that was it revealed that he obviously had his own set of, discussed versions. They were just in a very different place to mine.
And he wasn't really hurting anyone. I think that not all gurus are dangerous, but I guess finally, what do you think, or who do you think is the most dangerous guru, or what type of guru is the most dangerous?
Yeah, there are lots of people who aren't positive gurus, who are...
Like Oprah.
Well, Oprah is sort of ground zero for a lot of the kind of woo that has escaped into the mainstream. But there's a whole genre of things that I would put under the kind of alternative practices, like crystal healing, that to my view don't work. There's no evidence for them, but I also don't, people aren't poisoning themselves with them or anything like that. So if it makes you feel better, then that's fine. But I think that's a very good question. I mean, for a while there, Tate really was up there in the sense that I've spoken to teachers who said this stuff just swept through schools. When you put that in a kind of constellation with other stuff that's happening, for example, unfettered access to online pornography, our continuing reluctance to actually talk to adolescents about some of this stuff that takes into account what is actually happening. As a generation of young men who are both, I think, genuinely confused and feeling that they've been cast as the bad guys by feminism, and also receiving at the same time these really toxic messages about slapping and choking women, and also the fact that, that your woman should obey you. And if she doesn't, then you can get violent with her or with the other guy involved or whatever it might be. That stuff is really poisonous because of all the kind of hatreds that there are out there. Misogyny it's unique in how it's accepted to some extent as sort of just human nature in a way that I don't necessarily see with some of the other ones. I mean, that's a very contestable proposition, so I'm not going to hang too strongly on that. But you know what I mean about the kind of the sense that if pushed, lots of people will still slightly say that they feel that women who have sex with lots of people are slutty, and it isn't quite the right thing to do. Those are very old, and people are much more actually willing to voice those than they are now to voice homophobia or racism, for example. So, there's no ranking of which is worse, but I think those messages are particularly dangerous because they tap into things that are still quite close to the surface.
I keep telling you there's one more question, but there is my last question. You're a journalist, you've got a quizzical mind, you're evidence-based, but delving into this world for as long as you did and as deeply as you did, was there ever someone that you listened to that you were like, oh, maybe I might just try a bit of my own wee instead of a coffee? Or, was there anyone that you thought, there's actually quite a bit of sense in that?
My own wee, absolutely not. Hard no, thank you. I feel very happy with my decision not to drink any of my own effluvia. Productivity, definitely, I felt the appeal of. I would always love harmless. One hack that would make it easier for me. The idea that I could sit down and write for 8 hours a day as a writer, like writers are the most tortured profession for a job that is, my ancestors through history would have loved to have a job that involved sitting down at a desk for, for 8 hours a day. Writers nevertheless kind of completely tortured about it. So I felt the appeal of productivity, definitely. Crypto, the episode starts with the fact that I talked to my old colleague Alex, who told me not to buy any crypto in like 2013. And if I had not taken his advice, if I had bought crypto back then, I would be rich. So crypto is a really interesting one in that there was, I think when you listen to the episode, you'll get a very strong sense that there might be a bubble aspect to it. But if you're in the upswing of that bubble and you get out, then lots of people did make a lot of money. So unfortunately, I just came along to that one too late and I listened too much to my friend. I think I could probably get into sort of meditation-y type stuff. I think meditation practitioners would argue that is evidence-based. But I know people who've had Sam Harris whispering in their ear in his lovely soft voice and did find it quite calming.
I know what you mean about productivity and writing. I'll download 14 productivity apps and listen to hours of productivity podcasts to avoid sitting down and writing any day of the week.
So productive. The most productivity you can do is download more productivity apps. Yeah, it's true.
Look, at least we're not drinking our own wee or weighing our own poo. So I think that we're, on balance, I think we're ahead.
I'll take it.
Helen's someone that I've wanted to talk to for a really long time. I've been following her work. She also did another podcast that I'm hoping to get her back to talk about called The Church of Social Justice. And it's kind of similar to this because it's a little bit about how, as we've lost our faith in institutions, people have adopted social justice movements as their new religion. So it's kind of caught up in this idea of new gurus, that everybody's searching for something. And I thought it was so interesting what she said about how COVID just supercharged all of this, that firstly we were all locked at home with a lot of time on our hands, but we were also looking for answers. We were also looking for people who had certainty, or seemed like they had certainty, at a time of incredible global uncertainty. And we wanted to buy things like vitamins and vagina candles. We'll put a link to the new gurus in our show notes, and also to Helen Lewis's newsletter, which I highly recommend. The producer of No Filter is Emmeline Peterson. Our executive producer is Eliza Ratliff, with sound production by Madeline Joannou. I'm Mia Freedman. I'm not a guru, and I've never tried ozone rectal therapy. Thanks for having me in your ears.